James is our speaker today. He originally trained as a lawyer in the 60s and, in his own words, is a serial entrepreneur working in social and economic areas, especially in the 70s and 80s in areas of particularly human well-being and looking at things like access to education for those who were maybe not able to access it at those times. In his own words, you've given yourself a very specific list of things that you've done. He has been, in his own words, a pigman, a potter, a criminologist, a consumer researcher, green campaigner, creator of many social, cultural and economic enterprises. So, not a short list then. For the last 30 years, James's main focus has been on bees, particularly the health benefits of honey and how we can use that for the benefit of human health and, lastly, human social well-being as well. Particularly in the last couple of years, the Bee Art project is something that I think James is going to talk about today, where it is a project that is hopefully going to get set up in North Yorkshire Moors, where it's going to be a research and information centre specifically relating to bees. And if that's not enough, now in his 80th year, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, in his 80th year, James is now embarking on a PhD here at York in the Environment and Geography department, looking again at social and human enterprises. So I'm sure we're in for a treat here, and there's going to be an awful lot of interesting things that we're going to learn. So please give James a very warm welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It's very nice to see everybody here. I mean, I do talk a lot about bees, and I'm in a funny position now. You know, I'm a student, and well, you probably realise that I obviously didn't start my PhD, at 18 or 21 or wherever it was. But it's a really exciting time in my life, actually. It's funny because I've done so many things, and I've been involved with so many kind of initiatives which, in a way, have been connected with the honeybee or connected with a sense of wanting to sort of change something, that this opportunity to come back into education and to work with academics looking at transformation in the Department of Environment and Geography is very, very exciting for me. And so my PhD is not a desire to wear a nice floppy hat in the long run. It is actually something to do with actually learning a new language about how we might, as human beings, tackle a very difficult and challenging future. So, and I think bees have got a lot to offer us there. Earthwatch said that bees were the most invaluable species on the planet. So, how did it all begin? Well, I'll show you this picture of me in my beekeeping outfit. But I'm doing that because I want to sort of say that I'm not a beekeeper. We do have bees, and we do have bees, particularly in tree hives and in conventional hives. So, and the truth is that, as Tom has kind of alluded to, I'm not quite sure what I am really, except I've been on a journey which has very much involved the beehive. And I want to begin by telling you something about my personal journey, because I think something that I've learned is that the nature of your journey and the nature of what you end up doing are closely related. So, as Tom said, I managed to graduate, God knows how, with a law degree in 1967. But I met Karl Marx in the same year, so I decided that I wasn't going to be a budding barrister as Mum and Dad wanted. I was going to go to Africa and study West African law and anthropology. So I went to the School of Oriental African Studies in 1968. Now there will be some people here who will remember what happened in 1968, particularly in London, and there was a revolution going on. It was massive changes taking place. It was the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War, does anybody remember that? The Vietnam War, and we were marching on Grosvenor Square. We thought that the world was was a very difficult and dangerous place. So it was then, so it is now. And I'm not actually, I can't see myself in that picture, but I was there. And one of my heroes at the time, and I'll come back to this theme, was Herbert Marcuse, you know, who wrote the book One Dimensional Man. And he says, the people recognize themselves in their commodities. They find their soul in their automobile, hi-fi set, split-level home kitchen equipment. That was 1968. I met a number of people in that era. One guy was Wilhelm Reich, and an absolutely outstanding and interesting, controversial scientist who reckoned he discovered a fundamental life force. But what he did say was that, and I like this, he said, love, work, and knowledge are the well springs of our life. They should also govern it. I liked that. I liked that idea. Probably an urge to go backwards, perhaps. And the other man I met was Rudolf Steiner, and who, you know, said that the highest endeavor must be to develop free human beings who are able of themselves to impart purpose and direction to their lives. So I was a revolutionary, 22 years old, and having left university, came back home to Batley in West Yorkshire, which, as you'll know, is the place where ducks fly backwards to keep muck out in their eyes, and decided, instead of going into the family woolen mill, that I'd just be a revolutionary. I became a temporary registrar of births, deaths and marriages, which was very interesting, actually. But I organised the revolution in Batley, and I started an advice centre run entirely by local people, local tenants. I was very proud of that. But the time came, I was married, I had one child. I had this deep urge to sort of just leave all that behind. I'd actually been quite ill. I wanted to leave it behind. And I read a book called Walden. Again, some of you might have read it. Walden by an amazing man, Henry David Thoreau. And, you know, he said, it's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. So there was a flight to nature and to Suffolk and to a tiny cottage in a tiny village called Metfield. And then something extraordinary happened. Instead of wisecracking, you know, joy boy, you know it all, he actually was able, by a series of very unusual events, to become and do something quite useful. And for 10 years, I ended up being a potter, and I made and sold everything myself. So I made pots out of clay with my hands, put them in the kiln, and then when they were still hot, take them out, got into a 32-foot bus with my family and drove to places where I sold them. I helped set up Education Otherwise, which is, because we taught our children at home, Education Otherwise is now a very substantial national organisation supporting parents and children who are educated outside school. There must be something in my DNA because I created an organisation, brought together maybe 100 or so individuals and small businesses in mid-Suffolk. There were basically people who were trying to live in a different way. In the 70s, there was a lot of that about. There was self-sufficiency, and we were kind of moving on. We say, well, where do we go from here? Self-sufficiency is all right, but what about doing things together? So that was an exciting time, meeting people, bringing people together. But then the children grew up, and we had to think about. The eldest was 11, and I ended up having 6, by the way, which was slightly greedy, but the eldest was 11, and we thought about education. And what we did was to contact a Waldorf school up in North Yorkshire at Botten village, again, not a million miles from here, and we drove up in our bus. We did live in a house, but we had the bus as well, but we drove up in our bus. So the children, two of the children could go to that Waldorf school. And I bought a building and set up an initiative called the Mustard Seed. And the Mustard Seed, in a way, was a health food shop. In another way, was a door through which I hoped people would come and find out about new and different ways of doing things. I also set up an organisation called Common Box, which what actually was 100 or so businesses, small businesses, working together. We didn't have any subscriptions or anything like that, but the strapline was towards mutual help among small, friendly businesses. A modest ambition. And I was a prospective parliamentary candidate for the Green Party and campaigned against the putting of sewage into the sea, a problem which still exists big time. But in 1990, I started a hobby business with a beekeeper to look into a product called Propolis. And Propolis, I'll talk more about this, but Propolis is a resin which the bees collect from trees and plants. They take it back to the hive, they mix it with wax from their thorax, they process it through their enzymatic system, and they use it in the hive essentially as their immune defense mechanism. And I'll come back to that. It was an amazing substance, and it really took my imagination. I ended up setting up a company, and that company still exists, and we produce herbal medicine, we produce bee medicines, and we produce natural cosmetics. So now I want to talk a bit about honeybees before I get onto the science. I want to talk about what some people might think is pseudoscience, but I want to talk about why honeybees are so special, because what I've discovered as I've worked my way through kind of looking at honeybees and why they do this and why they do that, particularly about the medicines, I've come across a very interesting notion that if you look way back and you look at the kind of priestly function in Babylon, Egypt, India, Greece, you see the honeybee represented there as an element of that kind of priestly caste. So in Egypt, for instance, where they worshipped Neith, they did so in her temple, which was known as the House of the Bee. It wasn't known as the House of the Giraffe or Caterpillar. It was known as the House of the Bee. Okay, well that's one example. That's very nice. But in India, in ancient India, the gods Vishnu, Krishna, and Indra were known as the Madhava, the nectar-born ones, and their symbol is the bee. Also in India, the Kama, the god of love, here's a vase, and what it shows is the god Kama riding on a lion, and a lion riding on a bee. It's interesting, isn't it? I'm not drawing any conclusions here, but I think you probably see where I'm going. But in Greece, for example, at the great temple of Artemis, the priestesses were called Melissa, and the priests, the male priests, were called Essene, or king bee. So Melissa is bees. You know, the great mystery school at Ephesus, you know, the bee, the honeybee, was a kind of model for the Hierophant to aspire to. The honeybee, not just bees, the honeybee. So, and we know, of course, that in the Quran, the honeybee is very much praised. And here he says, "There comes forth from their bellies are liquids of many hues in which there is healing for men. Therein is surely a sign for men who reflect." There's an interesting story too that, of course, it's apocryphal, but it relates to a man called Gurdjieff who went in search, and there's a published description of this, went in search of a monastery thought to be somewhere in northern Afghanistan called the Samoan Dark. And the Samoan Dark basically translates as the Brotherhood of the Bees. And the idea of the Samoan Dark was that the monks would collect knowledge in the same way that honeybees collect honey and make honey, and that knowledge would, as it were, ferment in the monastery, and when human beings really needed it, then that honey, or the knowledge of that was implicit in that honey, in the idea of honey, would be released when people needed it. But I've been very influenced by this man, who had quite a lot to say about honeybees, particularly in a series of 9 lectures that he gave in, I think it's 1925. And here's one thing that he says. He said, that which we experience within ourselves only at a time when our hearts develop love is actually the very same thing that is present as a substance in the entire beehive. Just try this on for size. The whole beehive is permeated with life based on love. In many ways, the bees renounce love, and thereby this love develops within the entire beehive. It's an interesting thought. I mean, it's an interesting thought. I mean, I'll just ask you to carry it, think about it. And he also says the consciousness, this is even more interesting, the consciousness of a beehive, not the individual bees, is of a very high nature. Humankind will not attain the wisdom of such consciousness until the next major evolutionary stage. So thinking about health, he says, whoever looks at a beehive should actually say with an exalted frame of mind, making this detour by way of the beehive, the entire cosmos can find its way into human beings and help to make them sound in mind and body. So, I wanted to put that at the front end because now we'll talk about a bit of the science, because I guess in some respects there's probably a number of people here who probably are related to the science process. But I think this kind of contrast has been very kind of interesting for me to experience something at one level and also to be deeply involved with science at another level. So what is propolis? Well, Aristotle coined the word, and it means pro, before, polis, the city, before the city. Effectively, propolis is the defender of the city. And he described several different types of propolis in his monumental work on nature. So the honeybee creates the entrance to the hive with propolis. So every bee that goes in has to sort of wiggle its way through and brush up against this propolis, which has so many different properties that I'll tell you about, but one of them is a kind of antiseptic property. So it's part and parcel of maintaining this social hygiene within the hive. So it's a bit like going into those old swimming pools, where you went in and you went through the chlorine bath, So that's a bit like the role of the hive. So what's in it? Well, resins, of course, very importantly, but also waxes and fatty acids, essential oils, pollen, and all sorts of organic minerals and trace elements. But it's the resins that I think are the key things. Resins, as I know from my work with herbal medicine, resins are very important as natural medicines, because most of them, all of them, have a kind of anti-inflammatory properties. And of course, the resins are the plant's immune defense mechanism. If you cut a tree, then comes the resin to heal it. So the resins are present at the growing point and at any point of injury. So, and it's those resins that the bees are collecting to make this other substance, propolis. So, yes, so they use propolis, you know, in lots of different ways. They use it as a building material. You know, they actually put propolis inside the cell, and it's a kind of resin reinforcement. Literally, it's a resin reinforcement for the. If you didn't have the propolis inside the wax, then the comb would just collapse at a certain point. So they cap and they sterilize the cells. I mentioned that earlier with propolis, and this is a really good example of in a way, a sort of very out of version of how propolis works. Because if a small mammal gets into the hive, you know, like a mouse, the bees can kill it, but they can't move it. So what do? They like to warehouse propolis in different parts of the house. So they go and they collect that propolis and they mummify the mouse, basically. They coat it in propolis, and then they coat that mummified mouse in wax. So you can go back to that mouse 20 years later, cut into it, and it's completely mummified, i.e. it is no longer a source of infection in the hive. There's a Russian-Georgian beekeeping book that speaks about how do you keep a hive, a healthy hive. And the answer is you insert a bear's eye into the hive. That's a bit counterintuitive at first glance, but what it does, of course, is that it encourages the bees it's basically stimulating the bee's immune defense mechanism, and propolis is the bee's immune defense mechanism. So I think that's the reason for that. So the propolis has this kind of immune defense. So I think propolis, and I've had a few arguments with my scientific colleagues 30 years ago when I kind of intuited this role, but actually now the science has shown that this is the case. So propolis is the three-dimensional immune system of the honeybee. It's physical, because it's structural, it's social, because it's like social hygiene, and it's kind of existential. It's like an adaptogenic, so it's pharmacological. It's acting to maintain the balance of microbes and viruses in the hive. So, over over 35 years in a way, we've made quite a few, what I think are interesting discoveries about propolis, and really this is the team that I think of most. This is a photograph that was taken in 2013, but I started working with Dave Watson here in 2004 when I was the first. I set up this company. We had absolutely no assets or anything, but I managed to get a SMART award. This is a DTI award, and I got £75,000 for to explore the medicinal properties of propolis. The first company to get a SMART award to look at a natural medicine. And we funded a PhD, and in 2013 I'd had enough, and I got on the train. I was going on the train from Whitby, where I live, and the business wasn't working, and I was stressed out. You can see I wasn't actually. You can't see it all that well because I've covered it up with the logo, but I'm overweight, and I'm this plump one on the end, you know. I wanted to give up, and I decided that's it. I've had enough. But I went up, and David took me into this room and introduced me to all these students, all of whom had been studying propolis. They did this wonderful presentation, and they told me about one instance where they'd found some propolis They found some propolis from the South Cameroon, because I'd collected propolis from all over the world. I collected about 400 samples from all over the world, and they were looking at it. They'd found propolis in the South Cameroon, and they discovered that this propolis was from an area where there was sleeping sickness in the population. And they found that inside the propolis, in the chemical constituents of this propolis, there was an anti-trypanosome chemical. Now we'd done a lot of research prior to this, which showed that in subtropical areas, the propolis was more antimicrobial, and in temperate areas, the propolis was more antioxidant or anti-inflammatory. So you can see, you see about the correlation between how the bee is defending its immune system, and also, given the fact that propolis has been used since Egyptian times as a medicine, how there's a carryover, the temperature inside a beehive, virtually the same as in our body. There's a very close correlation, and you could see, if you were to take Rudolf Steiner's words, you could say that that superorganism, maybe 70,000 separate bees, that superorganism was highly evolved. This is I think is why propolis is proving to be such an exciting, not new, but new to our concepts of medicine. So, those are the two things that we discovered, and I thought that a light bulb went on, and I thought, here we have a medicine which is like ecological medicine. It's like we all live in ecological units, so it's where the bees find a solution for its immune defense by collecting the resins, where the plant has found a solution to its ecological challenges and needs, and then the bee finds that solution using the plant's solution and elevates it to how it needs, and there's a bridge then across in terms of efficacy, in terms of how that propolis can be of value to human beings within that ecology. So, always ambitious to create something. I set up the Apeceutical Research Centre, and I called them apeceuticals because they are therapies from the bee. And I wanted to create a centre where we could explore those medicines from the bees, and at the same time recognize that these medicines are coming from a living organism in nature, and we need to defend them. So we need to look at sustainable beekeeping. We sent one of our colleagues to 5 countries, our 5 African countries, to look at 3 diseases similar to sleeping sickness, and to see whether we could build on that kind of correlation between the chemical biological properties in propolis and the health demographic of people in those areas. And I sort of came up with this idea of ecological medicine. Now this is a good example. In Minas Gerais, which is in northern Brazil, there grows a plant. It's called Minas Gerais because it's general mining, and in Minas Gerais the land has been stripped through mining, the land has been polluted. One plant seems to manage to overcome the kind of cancerous impact of this pollution, and that's this plant, Baccharis dracunicifolia. So, and it produces these really big, fat, juicy resin glands, and the bees absolutely adore it. I've been there and seen and worked with the beekeepers there and seen the bees collecting this. So they're usually Africanized bees, so they're quite aggressive, and I've seen 1 or 2 people running for their lives from those who thought they didn't need a suit. So the scientists there, and it's interesting that back then, so I'm talking 25 years ago, back then the Brazilian government was starting to support Brazilian beekeepers in research, and they discovered that a powerful aspect of the chemical composition of Brazilian propolis, green propolis, was its anti-tumoral capacity. So if you see, there's another arc, from the plant overcoming the cancerous impact of pollution, to the bee elevating it into its immune system, and then it being of value to the. So I love this plant, because it's such a perfect example of this kind of ecological arc. And what we've been working on over the years is I've already mentioned this, is that you see in different zones, different climatic zones, you get, for example, in temperate zones, you get a domination of flavonoids. I mean, there's maybe something like 500 different chemicals in biochemicals in propolis. When I first started looking at it, we thought there was about 120. That's another interesting thing, isn't it? It depends. It's a bit like Thoroid. It's not what you look at, it's what you see, sort of thing. And I don't think I think there's so much more that we're not seeing even now. So, but in temperate climates, it's dominated by the flavonoids. In subtropical climates, it's dominated by phenolics. And biologically, it's more antimicrobial. In subtropical, the propolis is more antimicrobial, and it's more antioxidant or anti. It makes a lot of sense to me. So there has been a worldwide movement based on this, and in 2016, Dave Watson organised the first Propolis conference, an international conference in Glasgow. And in 2016, I and my son founded the International Propolis Research Group with Professor Vasia Bankova, who is the doyen of propolis research, and she's the head of the chemistry in Sofia in Bulgaria. And I could tell you there's all sorts of other people there, interesting people. But we had the second international conference organized by Vasia in Sofia in Bulgaria. And so we're beginning to sort of rock and roll. And then we had COVID, of course. And so we had online conferences. And they were just amazing because hundreds of people came. Hundreds of people from all over the world came to these online conferences. Obviously, they couldn't get to Sofia or Glasgow or wherever, but hundreds of people came from all sorts of countries, and we had sort of like 40 or so, abstracts and papers presented at those conferences, 40 each. And all those conferences are recorded. You can go on the website iprg.info, and you can look at 40 videos, 40 video presentations, scientific presentations about propolis. And then, because we delayed the third conference, we had the third conference in 2023 in Istanbul, and we just had the fourth conference in Brazil. And I'm amazed. I'm amazed that this wacky stuff is now attracting huge amounts of interest in the scientific community. I mean, very much related to the problem of antibiotic resistance. So there's been you can see the research figures. 1998 to 2022. You can see there's the beginning of an exponential curve there, isn't there? And a third of all the papers, similar curve, a third of all the papers were about antibiotic resistance. And there's been an increasing number of clinical trials, particularly related to COVID-19 in Brazil, and another very interesting paper about upper respiratory tract disease, obviously thinking about the COVID issues in Italy. So Nature's Laboratory, have published, I'd say, just in excess of 40 papers, and I've written 2 books about Propolis, and I represent the UK on the committee looking at standards for bee products, particularly for Propolis, of course, which is an extraordinarily difficult thing. It's like being in the United Nations, when you've got 35 countries, mostly online, because it started during COVID, arguing about how their Propolis is best and how it has to fit into. But it's just impossible, because everywhere where you find Propolis has a different chemical composition. So it's absolutely impossible to actually standardize. And I think what it's doing is it's opening the door to a new concept of medicine, i.e. medicine which is described by a relationship with your own environment in some way or other. But it's even more complicated than that. But so there's a big problem with this. Things are, everybody's interested, but there's a big problem for the honeybee. And this is the worst of the problem. It's called colony collapse disorder. And it's an American problem, you could say, although it is now present. It's now present everywhere in different forms. But basically what happens with colony collapse disorder is that what happened in America, when they lost 30, actually it was 40% in some years, the bees would leave a hive full of brood and full of food. They would go out and disappear. It was also called the Marie Celeste syndrome. You can see why. It's like they just disappeared. And the scientists are arguing, is it pesticides, is it electromagnetic radiation, is it carting bees thousands of miles, is it not letting them swarm, is it not feeding, is it feeding them syrup, is it, there are tens of reasons why people, and of course everybody says, no, we can't pin it down, no, we can't prove that it's one thing or the other. Well, no, of course you can't prove it's one thing or the other. It's a composition of everything. It's multiple stress syndrome. And that multiple stress syndrome obviously has a kind of impact where the whole integrity of the honeybee, the superorganism of the honeybee, cannot be maintained. And it falls apart. It just literally falls apart. And so you don't find a great heap of bees where they've just gone, they just disappear. So, we've kind of turned the honeybee into a kind of commodity, and now we're paying the price. And it's difficult, it's difficult in a way to know what healthy honeybees are, because this is quite an interesting example, I think. And I've been to see these bees at Blenheim Palace, because they discovered that very high up in ancient woodland, wild bees were making their nests in crevices, and they didn't have the same kind of disease syndromes as, I don't really want to take...
Sorry, have you seen them, is this still going, the Blenheim bees?
Yeah.
They are?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, because they thought there were only a few colonies, and everybody was getting very excited about it. Actually, I went about a year after they'd found it, and they'd found hundreds, well, 800 around. So, but very high up in the trees. So everybody's very excited about that. Are we looking at a bee? Are we looking at a bee without the, that hasn't been managed? And is this a potential? Can this help us to kind of to work with bees in perhaps a more sensitive way? Of course, many people are thinking, well, let's genetically modify bees, because bees are already being genetically modified one way or the other, and genetically inseminated. Inseminated. It's a crazy world, particularly for American beekeepers, I think. And I've been involved again with a group in America, not treating bees. They have an annual conference now. Big beekeepers are looking to try and to work with groups like this. I mean, beekeepers with like 10,000 hives, not 1,000 or 100. So it seems to me that given this kind of collapse of the bee's immune system, basically, it's like they're just disappearing. That we need to rethink the way we understand what it is we're seeing and how we work with nature. And I love this guy. It's a very readable book called The Global Hive, and I've got two or three quotes here from his work. And he says, it's hard to have an emotional relationship with the chemical formula. He says, when all regard is lost, nature becomes a commodity, the beehive becomes a factory, the bee queen becomes a genetic machine. And he says, the bee crisis shows how detachment can become destructive, and that a new approach is needed, one that is related as well as objective. And this is it. This is the one for me. He said, the loss of pollinators is an issue that should be addressed not just in a scientific manner, but also acknowledges the way we perceive, feel, and act. It's a threefold process, not a one-dimensional process. So how does it work? How does it work as a medicine? Well, this is some work we did at Oxford. And it works. And Philip found that it worked by uncoupling bacteria. When bacteria are going to start to get together, it inhibits that process. So it kind of uncouples. This similar model with quorum sensors. Quorum sensors are chemical signals that kick in when bacteria sense that they're in with a chance to take over, basically, and that's when the quorum sensor says, "Okay, guys, let's get together and let's become MRSA, biofilm," and then we're in a different ball game altogether, because biofilm is organized bacteria. It's battalions of bacteria. They have communication systems, transport systems. They've got everything, and they are. And I'm sure you've all heard of the problem with these kind of resistant bacteria groups, biofilm. They basically see the organism as one that, well, you're done for. Let's we might as well take over now. And there's an interesting thought about how evolution takes place in there somewhere, but I won't go down that rabbit hole, not tonight anyway. So with inflammation, it blocks. It blocks the development of prostaglandins. So it's kind of inhibiting the process that develops. And with viruses, and this is really interesting, I think, this was some work that was done in the 80s in the university in Germany, and what Ben Hastings is saying is that the protein coating around the virus is maintained by the bioflavonoids. The protein coating round the virus, maintained by those bioflavonoids, it's the same as being immune to the virus, but only with the presence of bioflavonoids in propolis. So in a way, if you remember the mouse, you know, the mouse is sort of sealed up, and the bioflavonoids in a way is doing exactly the same thing at a micro level. It's stopping the virus from developing and entering into the organism. So, the key words: uncoupling, sealing, blocking, switching off. You don't hear any shock and awe language here about killing, do you? You don't hear the sort of medical terminology, you know, that we're very used to about killing bacteria, sort of defeating them, the war again. It's a different mechanism. It's a softer mechanism. It's a more natural, related mechanism. And I think we've got to try and absorb this thought. And so I want to talk now a bit about immune systems, our immune system, because human beings have very complex immune systems, and we know about immune modulators. We know when our immune system goes down, but we don't know so much about when our immune system goes up. We don't. But my view is that, you know, human beings are three-dimensional. We have three systems. We have a nervous system, we have a respiratory system, and we have a metabolic system. And we know that you know, our immune system goes down if we have a physical trauma, if we have an emotional trauma, or if we have what you might call an existential trauma. If you don't think you're worth anything, your immune system goes down. So the question is, what makes it go up? And what is our immune system? It's not an easily definable quality. It's not, you know. And this guy, doctor in Germany, he's written this book called Immunity and Individuality. I think there's a lot in here. So he's saying the more diverse and individual the microbiome colonization, the better the protection against infection. It's not the presence of viruses and bacteria that make the disease, but when certain bacteria are not present. Because we've got, how many? 3.2 trillion bacteria and viruses. It's a big number anyway. In our gut, and that's like 300 billion years of evolution in there. And what we're doing is we're killing those bacteria that we think we don't want. But of course, it's like smart missiles. You know, you create a lot of collateral damage. And that of course is what we've done. He also says, until now, one standard applied to all, one cause, e.g. virus, one disease, one therapy, e.g. vaccination. This concept completely ignores the individual human being. And every human being's immune system is different. And I throw this slide in because I think it's really interesting that, you know, there's this new concept of salutogenis, positive health, and what they're saying is that the biggest factor in maintaining positive health is social relationships. Only 20% is medical care. I mean, okay, maybe it's pseudoscience, I don't know, but it's not, is it? You know, it's actually something we all know. You know, so, and this is a fantastic book if you're interested in this kind of thing, because this woman looked at 1,000 cases of radical remission from cancer in the US, i.e. people with cancer who had been diagnosed as terminal. There's nothing the medical system could do about it. And these were people who remissed from cancer. She came up with a list of something like 300 and odd reasons why, but she boiled them down to 9 key reasons. And I put those 9 key reasons into my threefold system, into my social, spiritual or cultural and physical. And you see those 9 reasons. So the way people get well is different according to who they are and how they are. It's a really interesting book. So modern medicine, on the contrary, is based on modern science, and it's evolved out of the isolation of compounds, and then the testing of those compounds, and the development of active compounds. And of course, it is a miracle. There's no doubt about it. In terms of crisis management, that kind of medicine is a miracle. But there's a lot of problems, not least antibiotic resistance. In the top 10 of the World Health Organization's global health problems. But there are lots of things like iatrogenic disease, i.e. disease caused by previous medical treatment. So I mean, look, I was in the GP surgery once, and they had an amnesty for people with their drugs, and some people are on tens of different drugs, and do we know what the interaction of all those is? No, we don't. So modern medicine, in a sense, it's one-dimensional, and I have a load of slides showing how Hippocrates said that medicine is an art composed of, try and get this right, the disease, the patient, and the doctor. Medicine is an art composed of the disease, the patient, and the doctor. He didn't say it's to do with rhubarb tincture or anything. He says it's a unique exploration of the relationship between those 3 elements. Today, the Medicine and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, medicines are a substance. So I think we've also got our social systems are 3-dimensional too. We live in just like we have a 3-dimensional systems in our body. We have 3-dimensionality in our society. We've got economic and environmental, we've got social and community, and we've got sort of cultural and spiritual. And now I want to come back to Rudolf Steiner, who said that a healthy social life is found only when in the mirror of each soul the whole community finds its reflection, and when in the whole community the virtue of each one is living. What he's saying is that there has to be a balance between the individuality and community. And he's saying, the well-being of a community working together will be greater the less the individual claims the proceeds of his work for himself, the more of these proceeds he hands over to his fellow workers, the more his own needs are satisfied, not out of his own work, but out of the work done by others. Well, of course, that's just, it's unthinkable, isn't it? It's actually unthinkable that. But actually, I think what he's talking about is something which is more natural in terms of how we sustain health in its broadest context. And he said every arrangement in a community that's contrary to this law will inevitably engender distress and want somewhere. I would say that we are pretty unhealthy in all of those 3 realms. Look at these statistics for loneliness, over the years. We don't need to talk about the economic and environmental crisis, do we? I don't need to show statistics there anymore, well, there's some people still think, but and in terms of our kind of cultural life, you know, we don't know who we are anymore. We're in a bit of a quandary about our meaning. This is a brilliant book. It's a book that I've come across in my PhD work. It's called Breaking Together, and there's a whole raft of people who basically now are saying there is no solution. We cannot work out a solution to the complex, interrelated meta-crisis that we're facing. A crisis which interweaves the social, economic, and cultural life of human beings. And that we basically have to find some new ideas. I've got a few ideas, but perhaps I'll talk about that the next time I come here. But what he's saying is that there has been a real process of, if you like, inner collapse. And I'm thinking, colony collapse disorder. Have we got community collapse disorder? Have we got, and yeah. So, and what he said is that he thought it was coming in a certain date, but he actually goes back to saying he thinks something started about 2016. It's just interesting. It's interesting how he's looking, because he's done the science. He's done the science about social breakdown, done the science about environmental breakdown. It's full of science. It's full of... So now's the third raft of the talk. There's human health, the honeybee, and the future of humanity. I mean, you know, it's a big issue. It's a big issue. I mean, it's a big issue for me. I'm going to call it. You know, I'm concerned about the future of humanity, and I think I always have been, which is why I told you that story. You know, in 2010 we set up the dispensary, which is a shop in Whitby, but it has a community library, it has a community bakery, it sells natural medicines, it provides information about, if you like, the whole portfolio of natural approaches, pretty much as I did when I started the mustard seed 40 years ago, and this was started in 2010, and and we have a project looking at the health of organisations. So we have a little kind of model where we can take people through their organisation, where we do a kind of audit of their social, economic, and cultural life. You know, it's not rocket science. It's just what you're thinking and feeling and how it's working. So, but my big thing has had a big blow in the last fortnight, because I've been working on this concept of the bee arc for 15 years. And 2 weeks ago, it came up for planning permission, because I have the land and I've developed the concept. And well, I'll tell you what it is first before I tell you what happened. But the premise behind the bee arc is that the bees have got colony collapse disorder. Their kind of immunity is crumbling. We have got community collapse disorder. Our integrity as a society is becoming ever more brittle. But we can learn a lot from the honeybee, and out of that learning, I've created the idea of a discovery centre. A discovery centre that says, let's look at the honeybee, let's see the challenge it faces, but let's at the same time reflect on the challenge we are facing in an exhibition. So the exhibition would be 3 pavilions, and we'll We'll take the visitor on a journey through the cultural and spiritual life of the honeybee, the social and community life of the honeybee, and the environmental and economic life of the honeybee. And then the second thing would be a research institute where we would do research. And we've been building links. We've already got links with something like 20 different universities through my work with research in Propolis to look at different aspects of the life of the honeybee, but also our social and cultural and economic life. It's a big idea. And I think we need some big ideas. And thirdly, we've got basically a community project, which I call Hives of Activity. So we've got community workshops, we've got a pottery, a weavery, which we're just starting. We've got woodwork planned, and a series of events and activities, which might be poetry reading. We have a choir. We've got meditation groups, all under this banner of Hives of Activity. And that's something that's growing and involving people coming together to do what they would like to do together, and building what we do when we do come together. Yeah, as I said, we have lots of supporters around the world, academics, particularly related to the Propolis world. But this is the building, and this is the sort of axiomatic of the finished thing. And we're looking for you to befriend us. We don't want your money just yet, but we would like you to say, yes, I think this is quite a good idea. That's all. And I want to finish with this, because this is a sort of a poem that I wrote several years ago, and I guess it sums up my feeling about the honeybee, and I guess it sums up a lot of this sort of hot pot of mixture of wacky ideas and science, good science. And so I'd like to read it to you and finish at that. So, how we have misunderstood you, Melissa, messenger of the sun, the honeybee, companion to the Logos, always a nursemaid to the human being, the detour around our divisions, back again to oneness. Never have you doubted us, though we have doubted you. Throughout the whole of time, you've been present in your priestly crown, present as a stepping stone for man, in Babylon, in ancient India, in Egypt, in the Samoan dark, in Greece at Ephesus, with Artemis the guide, and Melissa and the Iceni, your priestess and your priest. Come back this day into our imagination, not just a metaphor for sweetness, but as companion to our metamorphosis. Have patience with our prayers, as once again we honor you, asking your consent to be an ark which can guide us from these darkened times to a braver start, to a new awakening of the human heart. That's me done. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Really interesting. I've got time for some questions if you.
I've got time. If yeah, definitely.
If questions, I'm sure James would be very keen to answer them.
You may have said, and I missed it, I apologise if that is the case, but you started suggesting there was an issue with this, something you wanted to...
Oh, yes, sorry, I didn't tell you that. Well, planning permission was turned down, but interestingly enough, over a period of 15 years, it's been a very friendly relationship with the planning officers. But then about a month ago, there was a public meeting in the village of 400 people. 70 people turned up, and the overwhelming response was, and the parks officers, planning officers were there, and the overwhelming response was, we don't want this in our village. This will ruin our village. This is, you know, this will alter my view, change my view. This will reduce the cost of my house, the value of my house, and so on. So it was it was, as it happens, also a very quite a vitriolic outpouring of concern, something anyway. So on the face of it, the project has been stopped, but in a funny kind of way.
Move somewhere else.
It could go somewhere else. So, but it could go somewhere else. But the thing is, it's also a community project. It's not a concept. It's not a bijou visitor centre. It's there to tackle the question of the future of humanity. You know, and so. But I think what it's done, it's got a lot of people's blood up, obviously, but it has actually started a conversation about the issue, the big issue. So I think that's good. So I think there'll be a step forward. So it's.
How is it as if people aren't quite ready for it yet? You need to be a little bit informed in order to accept.
Yes, you do. And I couldn't, you know, I mean, we had 3 full-day exhibitions and information centres. We've created a newsletter which has gone out 4 times over the last 18 months, you know, with all sorts of information about it. So we've done a really good job on communicating what we do. But actually, you don't listen until that moment when you've got to decide, and then everybody goes, ooh, you know. But at least they've done that, and although it's been quite painful, I think it's okay. You know, I think it's okay for people to say, because at least then you can begin a conversation. Thank you for reminding me.
In Ghostland?
Yes.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. Are you from Ghostland?
No, I just it flashed up so quickly that I didn't.
It is in Ghostland, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Right in the centre of Ghostland.
Yeah, they put up with Heartbeat.
They put up with Heartbeat, yeah. I mean, I won't go into it, but I think the main issue is as the lady here is saying, you know, it's a kind of, it's like almost a cultural rejection of something. It's like I don't want to think about those sorts of things, and quite understand it. I do the same myself with lots of things, you know, just put it aside. You know, I don't want to be woken up about that. But the thing is, there has been a sort of certain kind of awakening, and so I think that's good. It started a conversation.
It's started a life now, hasn't it?
It has. It has. That's a really interesting way of putting it. It's actually come alive in the community. Yeah.
There was another question up here.
Hi, I'm Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Is that the Camphill Trust at Potter?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. So Mum worked there for many years, and I'm a beekeeper as well, and you live in Whitby, and my
Yeah.
friends live in Whitby. So great to hear this. It's so exciting, and you know, I mean, and this vision, maybe it's not the right place quite, or not the right time yet, but you got to keep going with it because.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
I think the initial knockback probably might, like you say, be a fear thing, but that's what you're addressing generally from what you're saying. Is the people's fear is leading us into this situation, you know. So yeah, don't give up.
Well, no, definitely not. I mean, I feel strangely. I mean, after the first, actually, it's bizarre, really, because I thought I was coping with it all very well, but a couple of days after the meeting, I just went down, and I stayed in bed. I never go to bed. I just stayed in bed for 3 days. I wasn't thinking, oh, how terrible. I just didn't. Something happened, But that was a time where I kind of started thinking and mulling it over, and then about 10 days later, I kind of woke up and I think it's all okay, because it's like an immune challenge. It's exactly the thing that actually gives the new a kick forward.
Well, you walk in your own theory.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Super cool, right?
Well, it's super cool, but I mean, I think that's, everybody's got a different, it just happens to be mine. And that's why I told the story, not because, just because it must be something to do with, I don't know, I won't say the word previous life or anything like that, but it must be in my DNA. You just do, everybody, maybe this kind of concept of immunity is about realizing that we should be ourselves, like it said over the, or was it Aristotle or the Temple of Apollo, know thyself, just be yourself, be who you are. And yeah, that's the topic for another, thank you for the question.
A couple more questions here, and then I'm sure James will be having some chat to people afterwards.
Yeah.
Oh, hello. It's a quick one, really. Propolis, are you saying that depending on which area of the world the hives are, the resources are such that they pick those resources that helps their immunity, which then gets passed on to us? Or are you saying that there's a challenge to the hive because of what's going on in that particular part of the world, and they selectively pull in those resins that are better at one or the other?
What I think I'm saying is that there is relatedness. There is relatedness, and how that works, I don't really know. I'm a bit of a fan of someone called Rupert Sheldrake, who talks about morphic resonance and about learning and habit and so on. And I think it's something to do with that relatedness. So that's why every individual ends up with a unique immune system. That's why every community ends up with a unique immune system. That's why, instead of looking for big solutions, we need to shrink back into those communities that we are de facto members of, and work something out. That's probably what we'll end up doing, whether we like it or not. When push comes to shove, we'll have to do that. But the B arc is a bit like trying to get there a bit before, and try and create some sort of ideas that can inseminate the. Of course, they're all there. They're all there, and there's tons of people doing this around. Tons of people. They're like kind of imaginal cells in metamorphosis. Those are the cells that are there from the very beginning, who turn the soup of the chrysalis, the soup of proteins and amino acid, turn it into the butterfly. But they're there. They've been there from the start.
That's like sort of a form of evolution.
It's exactly that. Yes. Yes. Yeah. And that this is really my PhD. This is what I'm. So this is why the PhD, you can probably see, fits in very nicely. Because I'm trying to kind of bring a structured approach to understanding it.
There's one more question here.
Just some reflections. Thank you so much. It's so inspiring. And just to echo what's been already said, just keep going. My story is very related to Propolis. I'm from Eastern Europe, from a very rural area in the Carpathians. And as you probably know, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Ukraine, we all love Propolis. We use it widely for all sorts of treatments, prevention. We treat common illnesses. It's been an integral part of my life for, I don't know, 30 years now. when I moved to the UK, and I've realised that people just don't know Propolis at all. It made me really sad. So coming here today and realising how much you've done already and what you're up to, it just really makes me feel emotional, and thank you.
Ah, thank you. Well, I think the Eastern Europeans have been my inspiration. Vasia Bankova is my all-time hero. She's not only, she's published like 300 papers on the chemistry of propolis, and she's a delightful person to boot. But yeah, I mean, in 1975, at the Kazan Veterinary Institute, and just on the Urals in Kazan, they published a paper which showed that if you put propolis with an antibiotic, it improved the effectiveness of the antibiotic by up to between 10 and 100 times. Of course, everybody says, oh, Russian research, rubbish, you know, not rigorous. But the Russians and the Eastern Europeans were doing that work when there was no patent medicines. You know, they were doing that work when they were trying to work out what would help human beings to get well. Yeah, so I have a tremendous admiration for the work that's been done. I mean, yeah. I always pay homage to the Eastern Europeans because it's a bit like the Sleeping Beauty, you know. They're the is it like the Sleeping Beauty? No, it probably isn't. But they kept the flame burning, you know.
I always took it for granted, but we could use it so widely for treating all sorts of stuff, and I've never taken any medication. I don't until today, knock on the wood. It's just incredible, and coming in today, realising there's so much research being done right now about propolis, it's just amazing.
It is amazing, yet it's a sort of secret still, isn't it, you know?
Yeah.
But, I mean, the problem is that pharmaceutical companies are not interested because you can't identify, there's no single...
That was my question as far as
Yeah.
you ask here, because it's probably really complex to answer, but why are they not interested in
Well, because you can't identify a single molecule or a single active ingredient, and therefore you can't synthesize it, therefore you can't patent it, therefore you can't make money out of it. I mean, that's just another way to knowing that we've got to rejig our thinking so profoundly, haven't we, in terms of how we conceive of health, how we see what medicine is. Because according to that other, the propolis is a kind of supernatural medicine. It is the supernatural, because it's like plant medicine plus, you know, but its real beauty, the real beauty is the use of propolis in the context in which you live. Which,
What sort of quantities are you talking? Say for example, if you're adding it to an antibiotic to make the antibiotic work really well, are you talking vast quantities of it, or are you talking minuscule amounts?
no, you're not. We've actually sort of repeated this research at the University in Leeds, but what we've found is that if you put propolis with a redundant antibiotic like penicillin, it starts working again. So, what?
How much of it do you have to take?
Well, you mean in an experiment, or?
Well, a human being taking it to help their health, would they take a spoonful of it?
Well, propolis comes in all sorts of forms, but but most propolis is refined in alcohol first, and then dried or put into different kind of products. But I think you'll in Eastern Europe, you'll find in everybody's kitchen cabinet a bottle of tincture, and people will just have a few drops every day, and a few more drops if you're not feeling all that good. You know, dosology is a different kettle of fish when it comes to this. I talk to dentists. We've written a book about the use of propolis in oral hygiene, and they want to know exactly how much, because what they're familiar with are dangerous substances, the use of dangerous substances like chemical compounds, single molecules that you don't want to have too much of or too little of. But in a way, the things like propolis is more on the food. It's more like a food than I mean, it's not.